There are three things that I need to do to use an Entity Framework class library within an application. The first is to add a reference in the application to the class library project that contains that entity data model and objects. Usual .NET stuff. I have to have a reference to that other project. Second thing I need to do is add a reference to the system.data.entity namespace, or to Entity Framework, which implements the Entity Framework in the .NET framework. And then I need to add the entity connection string to the application's config file. Sometimes you can just copy the entire app.config file from the class library project, or just copy the connection string element to the application's .config file. And, of course, you need to write some code in order to use the data. All right, so let's go ahead and add a console application here. So I'm going to come up here to File, New Project, select Visual C#, Windows Desktop. In this case, I want a console application. And I'm going to name this Model Test. Test. But instead of creating a new solution, I want to add this to the solution, because I want to have a second project that's defined within this single AdventureWorks library solution. And I'll click on OK, and that'll create the console application for me. Now I want Model Test to execute, not the AdventureWorks library, so I want to make sure that it's bolded here. That just means that that's the startup project. If it's not, I can right-click here and select Set as Startup Project. But because that's the last project that I added to the solution, it's already selected as the startup project. All right, so now it's time to modify the Model Test project to use the AdventureWorks library. So the first thing I need to do is add a reference to that AdventureWorks library project. So I'll come up here to Solution Explorer. I'm going to collapse this down so it doesn't take up quite so much room, and expand References here. Notice that we don't have a reference to that other project yet. So I'll right-click on it, add a reference, come here into Solution, and the only other project that isn't currently selected or isn't referenced within this new project is the AdventureWorks library. So I want to check that. If there were multiple projects, I could check more of them and add the references all at once. And I'll click on OK. And so now we have a reference to that AdventureWorks library, and now we can make use of the objects that are defined in that class library within our console application. All right, then the next thing we need to do is add a reference to Entity Framework here in this project as well. Now, there's a couple ways I can do that. I could right-click on Reference and browse to the files that are included here within the AdventureWorks library. But I'm just going to go ahead and use the Package Manager console in order to install it within this project. And I keep hitting Tab to get the IntelliSense and hit Enter. And it's successfully added to Model Test. Now what's interesting here is notice that it didn't give me the license information. It didn't say it was downloading it because it's already available here within this instance of Visual Studio. Okay, so that's all set, but what it did do is that it added those references and made them available within Model Test. So that generally is the easiest way to add the references that you need for Entity Framework. All right, then the third and final thing I need to do is add the connection string to the database. So I'll open up the app.config. As you can see here, we don't have any connection string section at all. So the easiest way to do this is to just come back over here to the app.config and just copy this entire connection strings section. So I'll copy that, go back to the console applications app.config, and I'll paste it in. It needs to be a child of the configuration element, so I'll just put it last here, save it, and that's all we need to do. And so now the console application has the information that it needs in order to make the connection to the database. All right, so I'm going to save all my changes to the project, and I'm going to go ahead and build it just to make sure that it builds at this point, that I don't have any problems that I need to correct before I actually start writing code. And it goes through AdventureWorks library, build 2 succeeded. Okay, we're great. Everything compiles. At least at this point, the application doesn't do anything, but all the pieces, all the necessary dependencies and everything seem to be there. All right, so now it's time to actually go in and write some code. So here's the standard starting file for a console application. It has this main, the standard entry point into a console application. And I'm just going to add some code here. But first, just to make it a little bit simpler, I'm going to add a using directive to that AdventureWorks library. Just saves a little bit of typing. Then I'm going to come down here to my main method and add some code. AWLT entities, and I'm going to name this object AWLT, and new up an AWLT entities object. And then right away, I'm going to write some code that uses a link query that is going to extract a list, a subset of the products that are available within the product table within that database. So I'm going to use the var keyword, and I'll name it products. I can type. AWLT, so that's using that entry, that entree into the object data model or the entity data model. And because I have a products object, a DB set object, collection object for products, that's a property of that AWLT entities object. So I can just select that through IntelliSense. And then I'm going to use the method form of link, which is my preferred way of doing things, in order to filter down the list of products that are retrieved. So if I just left it here, finishing out the syntax, of course, then I would get all of the products within the table. But I want to filter and sort those products. So I'm going to use the where method, and then use a lambda expression. And this, of course, is the C# syntax for lambda expressions. To use p.name starts with, and I want all of the products that start with F. So that's going to filter the products from the entire set of products within the database. And then I want to sort them, so I'm going to use the order by method. Oops. S.name. So they're going to be in alphabetical order by name. Okay, so because I have defined these entity data objects, that's all I need to do in order to query the database in order to get access to a subset of the products. I don't need to provide any additional connection information. I don't need to identify the tables where it's coming from. I don't need to define SQL statements. I'm using the syntax of C# itself in order to extract this data from the database. All right, so all of the rest of the code is just going to be then processing the data that's returned and displaying it within the console window. So first thing I'm going to do is do console.writeLine. And I'm going to put up a header, call it selected products. And then include some dashes for nice appearance there. And then I'm going to process the data. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a for each loop in order to get a reference to each of the products within that set of products that's returned. All right, so make sure that you understand what's going on here. So I'm going to be processing each product object that's contained within products, the collection that I created in the link query above. I'm going to loop through each of those products. All right, and the curly braces there. And all I'm going to do is write out information about each product out to the console window. So go console.writeLine, and I'm going to create a string. And I'm going to include different kinds of information there. Whoops, I need the $. And I'm going to replace in there the product dot name, and then the product dot list price, and I'm going to format that as currency. So I'm going to use toString, and then actually going to add commas and zeros and so forth. There we go. All right, so it's just going to loop through each of those products and output that formatted string. Then I want to make the console application kind of user-friendly, so I'll do console again, write, in this case, and say press enter to continue. And then use readline in order to wait for the user to do something. All right, I'll save all of my changes there. And hopefully if I did everything right, there's no red squigglies line. Should be able to run the application. Window will pop up. There's the header. And we get that information from the products table. It's all of the products that start with the letter F, and they're sorted alphabetically by name. And then all I need to do to end this is press enter or some other key, and it ends execution.